Today we're going to be doing a sort of part 2 for a video I made a few years ago where I checked out the various unobtainable weapons. Now that video really only covered the final game, therefore all the weapons that I showed off behaved exactly as you would expect them to. They were basically just boss or enemy items that I allowed Frank to use. That was really the only interesting thing about it. I gave Frank some items that he was never meant to use, and it caused some pretty hilarious results. But in that video, for one specific scene, I used a very early build of the game to spawn in the beam gun, as getting footage of it in the final game was basically impossible. And it got me wondering, if the beam gun works in the pre-release versions of the game, what other interesting weapons can we find in there? So this time around for part 2, I won't just be checking out items that are reserved for boss or enemies. This time we'll be checking out early beta weapons in general. I'll only be covering the weapons that are completely locked away in this build and don't normally spawn, as this is the first time in 15 years these beta versions of weapons have ever been seen outside of Capcom. As even though this is a rough internal build of the game, Capcom deemed these weapons way too early to be seen, so we'll have to mod them into the game. But with that out of the way, let's just get right into it. So first up, probably the weapon people have waited years to see is the rocket launcher. Now in the last video I mentioned how I wish I could have gotten the rocket launcher working, and unbeknownst to me at the time, it does work in this version of the game. It's got a proper item name for it and everything. While aiming the rocket launcher, it will recycle the machine gun animation as well as the crosshair, which actually suits it pretty well. But here is when it starts to get a bit weird. Instead of firing a rocket like you'd expect it to, it actually fires yellow balls, similar to the toy Mega Buster. It even emits a red light when you fire it. Yeah, I know, I was not expecting that either. My only guess is the rocket launcher was the original placeholder model of the toy Mega Buster before they finally got its final model in, and now we basically have two toy Mega Busters. We've been waiting nearly 15 years to understand what this unused rocket launcher was, only to find out that all this time, it was just a toy. It kind of broke my brain. It also obviously has quite a few flaws, as it was never supposed to be seen. Like, if you try to fire it without aiming, it'll result in this. When you shoot zombies with it, the balls stun them exactly like the Mega Buster. It's honestly nothing special. But at least the mystery of the rocket launcher has finally been solved, for better or for worse. Next up, we have probably the funniest early version of a weapon we'll see today. This is the plywood panel that appears in the final game, and at first glance it doesn't seem any different. But when we pick it up, you can see that for whatever reason, the board is like 2 times the size that it is in the final game. It's massive. I can only imagine this is a mistake on their part when scaling the model, but it's the funniest thing I've ever seen in this entire game. When you swing with it, it's pretty much completely normal, except it's so big that it clips through the floor. And attacking zombies with it is also pretty uneventful or different, it just looks so ridiculous. Next, we have the heavy machine gun, which isn't available to the player in this build normally for a very good reason. While the model appears normal, when we pick it up, Frank will hold it in one hand like he's the Terminator. And the aiming animation for it will once again recycle the machine gun animation. Also, weirdly, when you shoot the ground with it, it won't emit a blast of smoke like in the final game. The bullets will just permeate through the floor. And if we shoot water with it, it'll just use a tiny little splash effect. The gun is also internally coated like any normal gun in the game, so you can even shoot it while running, which looks so ridiculous. Obviously, this was changed so that you're stuck planted like a turret when firing it in the final game. It also only spawns with 30 rounds of ammunition and does hardly any damage to zombies for some reason. This thing is very early. Also, in an even earlier version of the game, it behaved exactly like this, except it didn't even have a model yet at that point, so yeah. Next, we have another item that I mentioned in the previous video, the cart or dolly thing. It's an item that no longer exists in the final game and was really only intended to be used to create this loading screen image. But anyways, in the last video I said that when the model is imported into the final game, it's just a prop that can't move. But in the beta, you can actually hold it. It registers as a melee weapon for some inexplicable reason, yet does no damage to zombies whatsoever. If you place it on the floor, it can't be picked up again. Now the lawnmower is a weapon that, while it was never intended to spawn in this build, it's actually quite close to the final game, but it has enough oddities about it that they hid it away for a good reason. While operating the lawnmower, you can very easily flip it over, and there's basically no way to place it back on the floor correctly, as there's no way to pick up the lawnmower. You can only drive it. There's a way to fool the game into letting you pick it up by driving it first, then area jumping to another level, and then when you spawn in, you'll be holding it. That's the only workaround. Also, when you're holding it, it's placed really weirdly in Frank's arms. You can tell they didn't intend the player to be able to do this yet. Also, when you're driving it, you can't back up when you run into an obstacle, which is infuriating. Actually mowing down zombies with it is pretty normal, however the limbs will fly all over the place. It looks really stupid. Next up we have the stun gun, which is also very similar to the one in the final game. However, one weird difference is that you can't move the camera while you're using it. It locks the camera into place when you try to stun things, which is really annoying. You can't really see what you're hitting. It's hard to gauge how close you are to the zombie. It's no wonder they changed this. In the final game, you could look around freely, which makes it much easier. Apart from that, though, it's not really any different. Next, we have Adam's mini chainsaw, which behaves really weirdly. Rather than its unique animation in the final game, it instead just uses a general melee weapon animation, which does not look right at all. It looks like he's just hitting zombies with the blunt body of the chainsaw. Everyone always says how the chainsaw is the best item in the game for its durability and all that. Well, not in the beta. In this build of the game, it will break in one hit. That's all you get. Now the beam gun is of course another weapon I mentioned in the previous video. However, in that video I mentioned how if you shoot it, the build will crash. And while that is true, I found a way to repair this so that it doesn't crash, and to my surprise, it actually just shoots bullets. I can only imagine they never finished the firing effect for whatever plasma bolt thing this was gonna shoot, so they just made it shoot handgun bullets, which is pretty underwhelming to say the least. Apart from that though, it's the same as the last video. Next we have the laser sword, another weapon that is similar to the final game but contains some strange differences. It was originally called the beam sword, and maybe that's some reference to a Mega Man weapon, I don't know. All the Mega Man fanboys could leave it down in the comments, maybe. For the most part, it functions completely as you'd expect. However, that's until you actually attack zombies with it. For whatever reason, when you slice a zombie's head off, it will make the head shoot up into the air like a rocket. I actually discovered this for the first time when I did a live stream of this build a few years back, and I was shocked to say the least.
Whoa, what the fuck is this?
Apart from that though, the only other early difference about it is that it barely has any durability. It'll break in like 20 hits. It's such a useless weapon in this build, and luckily they changed that. Can you imagine if your reward today for surviving 5 days in this game was a laser sword that broke in less than a minute? And lastly, we have the queen jar thing. For the most part, it behaves pretty normally. However, when you smash it on the floor, the bee would just stay there forever. I don't know why. Also, if you throw the jar at a wall, it just will not break, no matter how many times you try. If you hit a zombie with it, it will break, but some other oddities occur. For whatever reason, the slugs that spawn won't ever delete themselves. They'll just continue to roam the mall aimlessly forever. And I'm afraid that's really the only interesting ones. Now in this build there's a bunch of weapons with really weird changes that normally spawn in the game, like they don't have to be modded in. For example, this fire extinguisher, which behaves like it came straight from the depths of hell. But for this video I wanted to just dedicate it to the weapons in the beta that were hidden away in the files, and weren't quite ready to be shown yet. If you'd like a more detailed analysis on all the differences in the 70% build of Dead Rising, and just in Dead Rising in general, hop on over to the forum and check out the Dead Rising development archive. There's over 500 images where I've detailed every difference from the start of the game's development to its release. Links will be down in the description below. I know I haven't been uploading a lot, and I think it's because the year 2020 has just struck me with a lack of motivation, but I'm trying to fix that. As always, thanks for watching. There's a few links down in the description for interesting stuff, and if you like this video, subscribe for more.